Fuck off. On this week's Straight Talk, I'm talking to a good mate of mine, Wayne Junior Pearce. Yeah, that's right, the rugby league player, the fantastic rugby league player of the past, and today a very good businessman in relation to building teams for organisations and small businesses and all bigger organisations, and actually helping people become great leaders within their organisations and within teams. And he also happens to be a commissioner of the ARL, which is the body of people who are responsible for rugby league in this country. Well, we're going to talk about a whole lot of stuff related back to his footy career, but more importantly, what did he learn in his footy career that actually has assisted him today in his business, the business of his consultancy? And what are the things that he learned in his rugby league career and how were they parlayed into his efforts? Probably more importantly, his initiative as the leader of the Apollo team, the Apollo Project, which the ARL launched to get rugby league back and out of the quagmire of COVID, ahead of every other code in this country. They built the standard by which every other code had to play. How did he build the team? How did he choose the people? How did they all determine and sign on to what their purpose was? And then how did they execute on their purpose? And how did they overcome the dramas? And it's quite an important and I think a very interesting discussion to listen to, particularly during these times when we as small businesses are all looking at ways of either pivoting our business, surviving what we are currently getting, or more importantly, taking advantage of opportunities that may be presenting themselves in these times. So this is a good one. Come and listen to me, Mark Boris, at Straight Talk, and listen to Wayne Junior Pearce. Well, it's my great pleasure today on Straight Talk to be talking to a great mate of mine. I don't see him often enough, but we've been friends for a long time. Particularly through, and for that matter, I'm going to have to make a declaration. I am a big fan of his son, Junior Pearce. Mitchell I love him. He's a great kid. He's a great footballer, and he did great service to us at the Roosters for many, many years. And in that regard, like as I said, I'm a huge fan of Mitchell, but I'm a huge fan of this guy too. I mean, he's a bit more of a contemporary of mine. He's a little bit younger than me. He looks a lot younger than me, but he's a little bit younger than me. But I do remember watching him play football, and I just loved his work ethic. But everybody knows Wayne Junior Pearce. Welcome, mate.
Thanks, Mark. It's great to be here.
So I'm going to talk about your career in footy. We'll get through that sort of glittery stuff, but I want to get into the tin tacks of what you are doing in business. So, apart from being a very famous rugby league player, this guy here is a commissioner on the ARL Commission, which sort of pretty much runs our game of football in this country, or rugby league in this country. Is that right?
Yeah.
What is that? What's that required to do?
So the ARL Commission is a board, basically a board that oversees rugby league in the country. So our constitution really takes in all of rugby league across Australia, and we have we do fund to a certain extent parts of New Zealand as well through the Warriors. Right.
So and of course this has been a pretty tricky year, and we're going to talk about Wayne's role on Project Apollo, which is the thing that actually got rugby league back up and running this year before everybody else, which is, for me, is a brilliant outcome. And we take it for granted now because the footy's actually up and running. But I want to talk to Wayne about that. That was a magic moment for rugby league for me to be one of the first to get team games back up, and largely as a result of this guy's leadership in Project Apollo. There were other people involved in it, I get it, but it was sort of being pushed and directed and cajoled by the guy on my left. But what else do you do? More importantly, what do you do from day to day, mate? What's your deal?
Apart from doing a little bit of exercise like yourself, we got that in common, Mark. I quit coaching 20 years ago, and I saw the need for peak performance programs, particularly in the leadership and teamwork space in business, because over 20 years of involvement as a player and coach in rugby league, I learned a lot about what it takes to get a great team up and running and to maintain peak performance in that space. So I've taken those skills and worked and developed programs that businesses can take on board to help them become their best, because it's really for business. Most business owners will say, yeah, it's really important to have great teamwork in my team, but you ask them, how do they go about that? What's their formula? Because most business owners will look at team building and think that's about going out and playing lawn bowls for a day, or generating some morale through building a canoe race and racing canoes. And very, very different in reality, and in sport, as you know, the real cornerstone, the epicenter is trust. And from that spins a whole lot of other factors that lead to and will allow business owners, sports people, community groups to achieve great outcomes.
Well, I mean, this is terrible, but I want to talk about the shit now. But I need to cover off some other stuff. But I'm dying to, because it's really important right now. I'm dying to know what you mean by that, Junior. Like my business, for example, Yellow Brick Road business, as an example. I'm really worried about all the Victorians who work for us. We've got a large contingent of people down in Victoria, maybe 100 people altogether, who are all isolated and they're doing it tough. And, my initial instinct is to get on the phone every night and ring one of them, or at least one of them, and one of the proprietors and one of the branch owners, say, look, how you going? How's your family? How you dealing with this? But that's sort of like, what I get nervous about? I get nervous at thinking, you're just doing that because you should have done that before. Why didn't you ring me before? And I didn't go and see them. I usually fly down there once a month. I haven't been down there since March. So I really want to talk to you about that, because I need to know about that myself. I mean, what is the continuum? What's the process, and how do you build these strategies? But before we get onto that, I want to know a little bit about your footy career. We all know about, how many games you played in Origin, and, played for the country, and, your work ethic and your fitness, and, we remember games you played and all that sort of stuff. I'm not going to go there. Anyone wants to go and have a look at it on YouTube. I want to know, what is it you got out of rugby league that you've actually dragged forward into your business life? I mean, what are the key elements you learned out of playing at an elite level, and at the most elite levels of rugby league? And as a coach too, what did you get out of rugby league that you took into the rest of your life?
That's a really good question, Mark. And I think before you got to look at what I got out of rugby league, I think it goes back to what I took from my childhood. And I know we were chatting before we came on here, and you were telling me about your childhood and punch bowl, and the influence that had. And I came from Balmain back in the 60s. I grew up, and Balmain, you were talking about Balmain, what it was like back then. It was a lot different to what it is now. There was a lot of unemployment. There was a lot of poverty.
Very working class.
Very much working class, yeah. So, and my dad worked on the council. He was a street sweeper. My mum worked in the Colgate Palmolive factory in Balmain. We were 3 kids growing up, living with mum and dad in a 1-bedroom section part of a house. There were 3 rooms in our sectioned off part of the house. A guy called Mr. Cook lived in the front part of the house. He owned the property. And we had a lounge room, bedroom, and kitchen. And there was an outdoor toilet and shower we shared with the others. But that was life growing up. But what that taught me was I didn't know the difference, because everyone around us was the sort of same. Housing Commission, all that sort of stuff.
You didn't grow up with a chip on your shoulder, because everyone was the same.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's happened to me.
So for me, I mean, the big thing for me that sort of transformed my life was my father had a heart attack and dropped dead at 14. I was 14.
Wow.
He was 45. So when I was 14, that was a huge shock.
Smoker, drinker?
Massive alcoholic, smoker, and didn't look after himself. So that to me, I lost the plot. I've got to be honest, I lost the plot. Went off the rails for a little bit. Fortunately, I had a mentor who was a friend of my dad's who came into my life who got me focused, and he really inspired me. And what that did was that really forced me to step up and really take on a bit more of a leadership role, because I was the oldest of 3 boys. And but he got me to set goals, and he got me to set those goals, not just on footy, but also outside of footy. He encouraged me to go to university. First person in my extended family ever to go to university. Gough Whitlam, thank you, and I know you were the beneficiary as well. Gough Whitlam made it free to go to uni, so we could afford to go, even though we had no money. Anyhow, to cut a long story short, footy was, for me, a dream that I saw where I could earn some money that would allow me to live a bit more of a lifestyle that was a bit more along the lines of where I wanted to go, where I could sort of travel and do all that sort of stuff.
Let's get some perspective. What did you get paid a game, or what would you get paid when you first kicked off? When
I first started, my first contract was first full year in first grade was I think it was $5,000.
$100 a week. Well,
yeah,
on average, yeah.
Well, that's now, but back then it was sort of worth a fair bit more. But to cut a long story short, where what I learned as a young kid, and what really clicked for me, and I really encourage any young kid or any parent trying to get young kids to understand this. My mentor taught me cause and effect. If you do this, then there's going to be an outcome. Whatever you do, if you do good things, there's going to be a good outcome. If you don't put the work in, you're not going to get the result. And that led me to understand this concept of the 1%ers, which I got fairly young, probably 17, 18 years of age. I started to really put this together, and I started to understand the 1%ers concept, which they call now marginal gains. It's putting effort into all these little areas. So for me, that was really where I gained an advantage, because as a footy player, I wasn't a big guy, but I wanted to be the best version of myself that I could be. And I thought if I put effort into the physical fitness, into the mental preparation, because when I went to uni, I actually did 3 years of undergrad psych, which really taught me a lot about the mind, as part of a science degree that I completed. And so that helped me with the footy as well, and then the skill stuff as well. So, I mean, for me, that discipline really did help coming into footy. And then when through my footy career, I learned a whole lot then about applying this in a team context.
Did you have a coach that sort of, really drilled this into you?
Yeah, my first coach was Frank Stanton. He was my first coach, but he was the coach that really took me up to that international level. And he had a massive influence on me in that space. And he really was somebody who instilled belief in me. And I believe the really good coaches or the really good leaders are those leaders that can make people better than what they think they are. And that's not pushing them. It's actually allowing them to believe they're better than what they think they are. And I look at the really good coaches around now in Rugby League, the ones that have been there for a long while. The Wayne Bennett's, the Craig Bellamy's, the Trent Robinsons. These coaches, they're not teachers, they're coaches, and coaches are dealing with players and allowing them to actually understand and the cause and effect principle.
And how do they? And this whole team bonding, or the whole team effect, or the momentum that you get out of a whole lot of people operating on the same path, which we have to have in business. I mean, what did you see? What were the important things that you learned out of being in teams where teams became really successful as a result of this teamwork or teammanship or whatever the words are?
And I played in. Well, having said that, I played in some really good teams, and I played in some pretty ordinary teams. The second year I played first grade, we came last. And that was the first year Frank Stanton took over. And what happened there was he cleared a whole lot of the decks, brought a whole lot of players in that had the right character.
Well, we'll just stop here. So you've got a business. Let's say, this is not in my case, but someone out there's got a business, and they've got people in there who are difficult. Or they've got people in the business who are, and the business is doing it tough or struggling a bit. How important is it to get the right people in the team?
Absolutely.
Clearing the decks, as you
absolutely say. Critical. I mean, it is absolutely critical. I mean, for me, too many businesses and too many business owners are too soft. Yep. Coming from...
You mean intellectually soft, or you mean
I'm talking about
sensitive?
Soft. I'm talking about giving people chances, more chances than people deserve.
Okay, how many chances should you give somebody, you reckon?
I mean, it's a matter of what your standards are. From my perspective, coming from the space of professional sport, you'll get a chance. You might get a second chance, but you won't get a third chance. And to that end, it's really about the dimension of having those conversations. Cause a lot of people struggle with performance management conversations, and that's understandable, because where at school did you actually have these conversations, or to get taught to have these conversations? Never. No communication course taught in any school in the state or in the country. Yep. So, so when you come into this position as a leader, and you've got to have these conversations, a lot of people feel really uncomfortable. So they tolerate people without having these conversations, and then what that can do, that can sow seeds of doubt or create discontent amongst other people who see themselves putting the effort in. These people aren't putting the effort in, or not applying it in the right manner, but they're not being dealt with, and they're not being coached,
what platform
or being coached. It's not about getting rid of people; it's about coaching.
But what platform do you put up there, though, Pearce? Like, what do you say, mate? You lodge a complaint, or I mean, how does the proprietor, who's a leader by definition,
Yeah.
I mean, or the coach in a rugby league team, I mean, do they say, come and talk to me if you've got a problem with junior peers, or come and talk to me if you've got a problem with so-and-so over there, or do they say, I'm going to come, who does this? Where's it start?
Well, it's got to start with firstly, in my view, and what I've observed, I've been doing it for 20 years with businesses now, what I've observed is too many people are stepping away, observing, and not having a conversation first up. So what's the conversation look like? It might be, Mark, we need to have a conversation about blah, 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 blah. Okay.
So which means you need to monitor me in the first place. You need to have some metrics, or you need
100%. And this is when you have talk about have the metrics. It's a coaching philosophy. Coaching is not about having an appraisal once a year. Coaching is in the moment interaction about dealing with what is working, what's not working. Because coaching is actually not just having a discussion around this is not working. It's also encouraging what is working, so people know you want more of what you want. So that's something. And sorry, let's peel it back a layer, and that is when you talk about leadership, and I've studied this for a long, long time now. There's two, and it's well known that there's two sort of extremes to being a really good boss. Okay, at one end there's the management stuff, and at the other end there's the leadership stuff. Yeah. So the management stuff's about getting results in the here and now. It's about more pushing people to get a result, whereas the leadership stuff's about inspiring them, hitting what motivates them. It's about the big picture. It's focusing on the future. Now, in business as usual, if you're the boss of a company, you should be pretty much operating mostly in that leadership space, okay? Which means that you need to have conversations around performance management with your direct reports as they come up. But most of the time, you're focusing on where we want to go to. But in the management space, it's in the here and now. It's about push. Now, the problem is, how do people come to become a boss? Most people become a boss because they've got a great work ethic. They're technically really good. Maybe they're good at relationships with other people. Maybe they're an employee I don't want to lose, so I'll promote that person. But all of these reasons, they sort of support the management mindset, but they don't support the leadership mindset. So what happens when people come into a leadership role is they default to what they feel comfortable of, and they do more of the managing, which is the push. And they don't really spend as much time in that leadership space, because unless you work at understanding what this is all about, it's hard to understand what influences, what motivates people, reading personalities, that sort of stuff.
If I could just I found that fascinating. Maybe I could just come up with what I think might be an example, and correct me if I'm wrong. So let's just pick on the Roosters. Let's pick on Trent Robinson for a second. Robbo's a leader. You would agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. So let's just look at last year. Let's not look at this year, but let's look at last year, the year before, when they made that magnificent move. And and I know it was your son was involved, but Cooper Cronk got involved in our team. Cooper Cronk was the right outcome, as it's turned out, for our team, because he didn't do any more than your boy did. But there came with him this sense that the club has done something brand new, fresh. How important is that? How important is that from a leader's point of view, to do something inspirational as opposed to doing that little management thing?
Well, that's pretty much what leaders are about. Leaders are...
Do something unexpected.
Well, leaders
Strategic.
are prepared to take a risk.
Yeah, take the risk. Because it could have been a complete fuck-up.
The management space is more risk-averse.
Yeah.
So the leadership domain is about more taking a risk. Now, bear in mind, there's times when... there's a spectrum or an ability. The really good bosses have an ability, and I'm sure you're the same, where you'll operate. You want to be operating in that leadership space, business as usual. But if a crisis comes up, you've got to dive into this space over here, and that's a bit like Peter V'landys as well.
Yeah, he's done that recently
at the NRL.
He's sort of like the CEO. Great respect.
Yeah.
I mean, to your acting CEO, Abdo. I think Peter. I understand he doesn't want that role anyway, but he has, as a leader of your organisation, I guess, has actually stepped into that position.
Yep.
So, inspiration. So, I think what Junior's saying here is that I want to say this to the audience. It's very important. If you're the proprietor of your business, you might be really good at this sort of management day-to-day stuff, and you might have the skills around making sure the technology is right, etc. And that you might be able to pick people up on these little refinements, etc. But you've actually got to make sure that if at any one stage, if your business needs, like right now, it either needs to be pivoted or something needs to be done to survive, or you need to do something to take advantage of an opportunity that exists, you, the leader, have to do the inspirational thing, and you do need to do some risky things. And they may not be the right things, but you need to do the risky things. It might be the wrong outcome, but you need to you need to grow a set and go and do something about it.
Yeah, and if you know your business, you're going to have a gut feel around what's right, what's wrong. So it's not as big of a risk as what other people may think.
And if it's wrong, it's your risk anyway.
And nothing's perfect. You know, imagine if Microsoft didn't take a risk. You know the risks they take. They'll put a product out, and how many updates do you get on that product? You know what the updates are? That's where they stuffed up.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they get the product out there.
But they call it an update, though, which is even better.
They call it an update. They don't call it a...
It's pretty bright, but that's very bright. So just the two
iteration.
things. I just want to two things here that Junior's saying in terms of the teams. This is his area of expertise, both in terms of experience and also what he does as a job day to day, and what he actually does for the NRL too, or for the ARL, I should say, is that if the wrong people are in the team, you've got to have enough sort of systems in there that you know when someone's not doing the right thing, and you either give them a chance or two chances, whatever the case may be, but you don't persevere. You don't play that game. You've got to build the right team, and then you've got to manage your team. And as a leader, you've got to be prepared to be able to step aside and make those difficult and or strategic decisions that make the difference between survival and not survival, or taking advantage of an opportunity as it presents itself, or missing out on the opportunity. And that's a big deal.
It is, Mark.
How do I build a team spirit though?
Before we get into that, can I just make one point? Addition to what you're just saying there. The opposite of this stepping in and doing what you've got to do is the managers that do the opposite of that, and they micromanage.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely worse, because what that does, that cuts to the core of breaching trust.
Right.
And so if you're a micromanager and you're looking over everybody's shoulder, and then that type of leadership it's gone. It's old style. It's 80s style. And like back in the 80s, I remember I got promoted to a role where I was working with Channel 10 at the time, and they sent me on a management course. Now, if that was today and I was in that role, would they send me on a management course, or would they send me on a leadership course? Right? Because nowadays the really prime skill set that's going to suit this rapidly changing world, this uncertain, complex world that we're in, is the skill set of leadership. That's the
and you teach this stuff, don't you? You do.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the goal. The management stuff is the stuff that we pretty much can grasp easily. It's that leadership stuff that's really the goal now for the 21st century.
Before you move off that, what is the name of your business? So, like, if anybody's listening and they're looking for someone to come and help them with either management or leadership and or team building, what are the names of your businesses so they can get you on, look you up on the internet?
Yeah, I've got two businesses. One's it's called Wayne Pearce Advantage. That's where I work directly with clients, and basically in achieving peak performance, particularly in this leadership and teamwork space. And the other business is a business where I'm working in schools, because for me, like yourself, we're public school educated kids. For me, the public education system needs as much support as it possibly can. So we run programs for school teachers, professional development, professional learning in that space. It's called Wayne Pearce Academy, and that's something that got a range of courses that are accredited by NESA, which is the statutory authority that accredits courses for teachers.
And this is not just about going and having a talk to everybody. This is actually building programs.
These are skill sets.
Actual
skill sets in communication, skill sets in team
and accountabilities and
all that sort of stuff.
Everything. Like, it's a proper course. As opposed to Pearce, you just get there and talk for half an hour. So, I mean, that's important, because, I mean, a lot of these businesses out there would like access to people like you. I mean, they don't know where to get access. I mean, who do they Google? Who do they find? I mean, it's not an easy thing to do. So, and I want to go back to a real life example. I want to talk about Project Apollo. Project Apollo was the project, as I understand it, that Peter V'landys authorised you to do to get the Rugby League back up and running. Could you just explain a little bit about the background of that? Do you mind explaining a bit of the background, how that happened?
Yeah. So how it happened was after round 2 of the competition, we had an advisor leading into the competition start, a professor who was advising us on the risks of COVID, and our advice was that we could start the competition, and we started the competition with crowds. Round 2 of the competition, the government said no crowds because the risk in the community, infection in the community was increasing significantly. So there was no crowds into the second round of the competition. The day after the second round of the competition, our advisor, the professor, called Peter V'landys and said, we need to have an emergency commission meeting. I've got to brief the commission, and she told us that Australia was going down the path of Italy, that infection rate was increasing massively, and that she wouldn't support the continued playing of the competition. So we had to postpone the competition. At the back end of that week, I had a conversation.
It's only a week. We're talking about a week later.
We're talking 4 days later.
4
so
days
it's on
later.
the Monday. The Friday of that week, I had a chat to Peter V'landys about the fact that we needed to get something up and running as quick as possible. And he sort of said, well, are you up for that? And he said, would you head that? And I said, I'd love to, yeah. So he said, well, you look after getting us back on the field, the footy field, and I'll look after the broadcasters. So that's sort of how that started, and then.
And what's a team like that look like? So your team look.
Yeah. So then I had to work out. Well, I put my hand up for this gig. It's a pretty big gig. How do we go about that? So I didn't want a huge team because then it's people. I find in too many teams, once you get over 8-9 people in a team, it's very difficult to manage communication. So I wanted to have a small group of key people who I could trust around their character. I wanted them to be people who had a can-do attitude, people that also were able to think outside the square. So we sort of, I should say, got the likes of Trent Robinson on board from a coaching perspective, and also Trent had an infectious diseases doctor who was working with the Roosters and had been working with the Roosters for quite a few years. And the infectious disease was really about trying to avoid the flu and all that sort of stuff. Then I got Don Furner, who was an experienced CEO from Canberra. There was Troy Grant, who was the former police minister and emergency services minister. He is also on he's deputy chair of the International Rugby League. So, and I want to get him on board because of his understanding of crisis. And there was a number of others.
And Dave Heslop?
So what happened was initially we got these internal stakeholders from within the game. Clint Newton was another one from the Rail Players Association, etc. So there was a couple of management team members as well from the NRL, because I wanted some people to do the legwork, because as a team leader I wanted to have confidence in people that could follow through on the legwork. But what we didn't have when we first met, we discussed a framework, because we met a few days later. We wanted we needed to get some expertise around infectious diseases, and also around the connections with the government and public health. So we had the infectious disease doctor from the Roosters who came on board, who was really excellent, Dr. Cassie Workman. And then what happened was I was stuck, because Cassie really wasn't sure who would be a good person for us to have qualified enough to sign off with the government, because for any protocols that would get us back on the field, we needed to get it signed off with public health and the government. So I was a bit stuck. And then I got this email from a guy who sort of said, I used to train at the gym with you. I'm a ex-special forces soldier. He said, I've now got a decontamination business as a consultant, blah, blah, blah. Would like to meet with you, to some ideas around. So I met with him. And his name's Shane Healy, and we got him involved, but he still wasn't senior enough. But what he did was he put me onto a guy called Associate Professor David Heslop, who is the advisor on COVID to the Australian Army. So he's very highly credentialed and also well connected with the government. So we got him on board, and he together with Shane and with Cassie have been outstanding in terms of their guidance and the relationships they've got and with the important figures in public health and also the government.
So you picked your team, So that's what you were talking about before, making sure you get the people the right character.
The right character.
Which that's an assessment everybody's got to make in the particular outcome you're trying to achieve in terms of business, or this is your business at this time. Your business at this time is getting the NRL back up and running. That was your business. Then how did you sort of build the team?
Then we wanted some skills as well. So we got the character, core character. Then we need specific skills, which we targeted with the experts, including Dave Heslop, and then. We actually then came together.
You meet weekly or daily, or communicate every minute?
We communicated pretty much. Well, we met in the early weeks. We met every week, but there was communication with specific individuals.
So when you meet, do you send everybody off on it? Does everybody go off with a task and it's all minuted? How do you do this?
So we had 10 work streams. So we had 10 different work streams that came out of the first meeting that we had. And those work streams range from broadcaster engagement to specific protocols for the Project Apollo. So the 10 work streams had members of our team that were accountable for those and following through on those, and that effectively was the plan that we were working to, and we had timelines around that as well.
Right. So, because I think people out there, in business, they often hold meetings. They don't record anything. They don't document it. They don't say when the next meeting is going to be. They don't say, well, what did we do in the last meeting that you should have done for this meeting? So, could you just maybe take us through a little bit of the mechanics of this stuff, Junior? And I think it's important because too often people hold meetings and nothing ever happens. The whole meeting, everyone says rah rah rah. It's a big cheerleaded game, and then they'll walk away and they'll go back to doing what they do, and then they meet again maybe in a month's time. So,
the other thing around that is if you don't have a record of what's been said or what's been promised, how can you keep people accountable? How can you keep yourself accountable?
Yep.
So it's really, really important for us to in the project sense of Project Apollo achieving what we wanted to achieve. Really, really important.
Because time was against you.
It was. So bearing in mind that there was upwards of $11 million a week that was going down the gurgler when we weren't playing. Yeah. So there was a significant amount at stake. The clubs weren't getting any income. The players were not getting any income. So there was a lot, which is a lot of businesses out there that are struggling. Yeah. So the time was really imperative. So we had to. My challenge to the team at the first meeting was, how could we get the game up and running in a safe manner as soon as possible?
So you put a challenge out there. So how important is that for a team to sort of buy into that, like day one?
Absolutely. Well, for me, it was really putting a compelling case to the team why we needed to get back as soon as we possibly could.
So that's what the leader does. The leader puts a compelling case up, and if it's in business, saving a business has been around for 30 years, and all of a sudden we're about to close down, and we could be talking about or prosecuting the fact that people are going to lose their jobs, and our customers are going to lose their access, and the community that we deal in is going to break down. So there's the case, okay?
Yeah.
That's the case you built.
Yeah.
Then how hard was it to, everyone we've been nodding furiously in your team of 8, whatever the team was, numbers. But how do you actually know that they're committed? Actually, what do you ask them? What do you do?
Oh well, it was. Well, I didn't have to ask them anything because you just got to look at their eyes, and you got to look at their. They didn't need to be there. They weren't getting paid to come along to this meeting. They wanted to be part of something that people in the future are going to look back and say, wow, that was a turning point.
I look at it now. I'm still saying it was why I want Johnny here, because it is a turning point in the rugby league game.
Yeah, and to be part of this, and this is the purpose thing. Like the great teams, the great businesses have a sense of purpose. You don't really need to ask them, are you committed? When there's that sense of purpose there, then people actually will buy into it, and collaboration flows from that sense of purpose more than anything else. I've never ever seen in the game of rugby league, which I've been in for 40 years at the top level as a player, coach, commentator, and administrator. I've never seen the level of collaboration across all these tribal groups across the game, or the clubs.
You talking about the clubs?
Yeah, that I have seen since the start of this Project Apollo. It's been absolutely phenomenal.
And it's a great accolade for the game, to be honest with you, and which is everything. That's the community, the fans, the players, the coaches, everyone involved. But Junior, Just give these guys an idea, because I mean, I know so many small businesses just don't write anything down. I mean, do you have someone to take the minutes, or how did it work? Did you circulate the minutes at the end of the week and say, here's the action items that you Trent Robinson got to do? I mean, and then
So what we did was Andrew Abdo, who's now
acting
CEO, he was part of the team. He was Chief Commercial Officer, and he was the one that was basically captured what our actions were, all the minutes, and basically documented those as in terms of work streams, who's responsible, and where we're working towards.
So someone has to collate all this stuff and accept it all, and you had a place with it all, everything. There was a repository with all the information went to.
And we could tick off where we're at.
And everybody was kept up to date, so everybody knew what everybody else was doing.
Everybody knew where we were at. Yeah. So, and that was the good thing about it. And the great thing about what's come about out of COVID is that we were able to communicate a lot more effectively through the online formats like Zoom. You know, I mean, that's the really great thing about it. And you look out of the quagmire that is COVID, you look for upsides, and that's definitely an upside.
Digital communication.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's sort of interesting. So, I mean, I say it all the time in terms of business, but right now, especially, you build a structure that everybody decided to adhere to.
Yeah.
They didn't have to adhere to it. They didn't do it because of that reason. They decided they would adhere to the structure.
Yeah.
And it's all very well to have a great purpose and an idea and something lofty, which is what you were doing. It was a very lofty, idealistic thing to do to get the game back up and running. And everybody was being extremely generous, giving their time in order to make this happen. But it doesn't happen unless you've got a structure.
No.
And you've got to have a structure which everybody signs off to.
Absolutely.
And someone's got to drive that structure.
And the other thing, Mark, was too, at the first meeting, we didn't have the data because it was our very first meeting. It was only 4 days after I had the conversation with Peter V'landys. We didn't have the data to sort of to pin a date on when we thought it was realistic to come back.
Which was
May 21? It was May 28 in the end.
May 28, yeah.
But the next meeting, before the follow-up meeting, which was a week later, I'd done a whole lot of work with the advisors, and at that particular point, and Peter V'landys was involved heavily as well, because Peter was great, a great sounding board, because he'd been involved in the equine flu virus.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah,
many years ago.
As head of the AJC, whatever it is.
He was head of the racing authority.
Yeah,
CEO there. And what I felt was absolutely, we couldn't come out of that second meeting, which was only a week later, without having a definite date on when we would resume, for two reasons. One, it gave people a focus, a positive focus of what we're working towards, and have got everybody aligned. But two, the players and coaches in particular they're used to having a schedule, and if they didn't have a date when they're going to start, they couldn't work backwards and say when are we going to start training and doing this and doing this and doing that, and that would create a lot of anxiety. And we were already having a lot of increased calls to a counselling line that we'd set up, or we had already set up for mental health. So we were aware that was becoming a bit of a problem, and so we needed to have a date. Yeah, but it couldn't be just a date. It had to be a date or a deadline in terms of your business for when we wanted to get that outcome.
Can I just something's really important? I mean, something I noticed, and I want to get your opinion on this. You got a date, and I understand the reasons why you got the date, and I think it's fair enough. It makes sense. So the business, all the people in the business had something that they knew was potentially going to happen for mental health reasons, for certainty reasons, for all those sorts of reasons. But one of the things I noticed during the whole period, the moment you guys must have reported the date up to Peter V'landys, V'landys started prosecuting that date. So he pushed that date day in, day out, and it was literally every time I heard him on radio, on television, he talked about 28 May, and he prosecuted the shit out of this. And in business, I think what's really important is if you've got some big idea that you think that you're working on that you want to launch, then don't wait to the day it's going to launch. You should prosecute it now, because it actually helps you get to the date.
Yeah.
How important is this in a psychological sense for everyone involved, that your chairman, Peter V'landys, was out there telling everybody it was the 20th? Because if let's say you said 28th to Peter V'landys, but he never said it to another person, no one else out there knew, would it have been as effective as him telling everybody about this 28th date?
No, I mean, and you use the word prosecute. I think it's a great word, because he was prosecuting it and he was pushing that date.
And he was prolific in the way he did it.
He was. And what that actually does, when you keep saying that date, it develops a sense of certainty.
It lives.
And certainty is what people are looking for in times of crisis. In a fluid environment, people are looking for that sense of certainty, and that's what he did. He advocated for that. He sponsored that, and ultimately, we delivered on that.
He was prolific in the way he did it. And to be honest with you, it not only builds certainty, but it builds expectation. So it nearly gets to a point where you don't want to disappoint.
Yeah,
it drives you. You think, shit, the boss has gone out there and said 28th of May. He's told everybody. Yeah. Now all of us, we have to deliver.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great thing.
Oh, it is a good thing, absolutely. And what Peter's good about, and I've said this many, many times, he's good at stretching. He's good at pushing beyond the comfort zone. Yeah. And in a business, if you want to differentiate yourself from others, you've got to do something that's different. You've got to take a risk, but it's got to be a calculated risk. We didn't choose this date out of a bucket. We looked at what I said to the team and to our advisors: if everything goes our way, what would be the earliest date?
So you didn't, because that's important. You didn't pick a date to give yourselves plenty of runway.
No.
But you didn't pick a date that was ridiculously unrealistic.
No.
So you picked a day. Was it closer to unrealistic, or was it closer to being plenty of runway?
At the time, I thought it was closer to being realistic, but it proved to be a little unrealistic when some of the hurdles come up.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there were a lot of hurdles thrown up from public health.
So, okay, we've got the hurdles now. So we set the scene. We've got our project. We've got our teams with the right character. We've got our structure that they're all answerable to. Okay, now a curveball comes in.
Yeah. Well, the first curveball that came in one of the early curveballs that came in was that the health minister said that...
Brad Hazzard?
Yeah, Brad Hazzard, in relation to... He wasn't aware that we had permission to come back to play. But the person who's in charge of emergency services in the state when there's a crisis is the police commissioner. And we actually had a letter from the police commissioner that gave us authority, provided we adhered to public health guidelines.
And he signs off, doesn't he?
Yeah, he signs off.
And then it goes to Hazard. No,
it doesn't go to Hazard.
It doesn't at all.
He's the authority. So
right.
he's the police commissioner, essentially
We're talking about Commissioner Mick Fuller.
Mick Fuller, yeah, yep. Mick Fuller. Yeah, he was fantastic in supporting us through this whole crisis.
Can I ask you? And I'm a big fan of Mick Fuller. How important has Mick Fuller been through all this?
Phenomenal. I mean, I think Mick has shown outstanding leadership from the point of view decisive. He hasn't bought into the fear factor that drives consensus and drives people to align with what other people say. And this is pretty much a standard policy from governments across the world. If you want get your people to align, get them scared. Yep. Yeah. So, that's what drives alignment is, I'm worried about this. I'll follow what you say. But Mick's not like that. Mick's really been very positive, but been decisive. And, I can't speak highly enough of his leadership.
Him or the police force, to be honest with you. I mean, I think they've done a brilliant job.
They have.
I mean, I know that there's 350 policemen right now on the New South Wales Victorian border who have just been seconded from whatever command that they come from. Could be Waverley, could be anywhere, and they've just been told you've got to go down to the border, leave your family behind, you just off you go down the border and protect the borders. And they all do it willingly, without question. I just, to be honest with you, as a front line, or first responders, I mean, all our first responders are brilliant, but I think the police are doing an extraordinary job, and as has done our commissioner. So let's just, the curveballs come through.
Multiple curveballs.
But what do? Something comes in and you just get whacked, and you get something like this is made to look like, oh shit, this is now impossible. The date's not going to happen, or there is another hurdle to get over. How do you get the team on side? How do you rebuild how do you make them feel positive that, no, hang on, it's going to be okay?
Well, it's just being transparent with your team. You've got to be open with your team. It's not just about talking rosy and talking all the good stuff. You've got to share You got to share.
But how do you play around with the language, or
Yeah, it's about sharing where we're at, but also having a plan and making sure that you communicate that plan. And this is the key. The real key here was communicate. We were having regular daily communication with because it's not just the team, Apollo team members. Because the broader team is all the clubs bringing them on the journey.
Yeah.
It's all the players bringing them on the journey. It's the fans even bringing them on the journey. It's the sponsors, it's the broadcasters, and the broadcasters is another one as well. There was some conflict there as well. So there was a whole lot of stuff that's
and state governments, premiers,
yep,
Queensland
exactly.
Premier,
Yep.
and the team in Victoria, like
yeah.
Melbourne.
I mean, ultimately, the Prime Minister was super supportive. Scott Morrison did fantastic. Gladys Berejiklian, New South Wales Premier, great. And Anastasia Palaszczuk, apart from pushing, she put up a bit of a barrier at first. In the end, she was very, very cooperative.
I think she worked it out.
And
Queensland's a pretty parochial place in terms of rugby league. There's no, I mean, it wasn't a great vote getter for her to stop it from happening. But we'll put Palaszczuk, just we might park her for the moment because I got some views on that. But it doesn't matter. She did do the right thing at the end of the day, and the game got up and running. Where Apollo's now closed off, I guess it's not a project anymore.
No, we're still as a project team, we're not really active now because it's handed off to management. But me as the team leader, still in contact with our infectious diseases expert.
Where are we worried now? Where are you worried now? Are you worried?
No, not worried, but certainly observant. Yeah, the government is in a much better position now to handle any of the cluster.
In terms of tracing, is that what you mean?
In terms of testing, firstly, and then in terms of tracing.
Right.
Yeah, so much better position than we were initially.
Well, I had an experience with it, I have to tell you. I went to the hospital here at Sydney Hospital, which is in Macquarie Street, and I went to the outpatients, and I filled out a form, which is not intrusive. It's a 3-page form. Filled all the parts out. Then there's a QR code which they ask you to copy. You copy the QR code. You give them your mobile phone number. You consent to a whole lot of things. Then they ask you about 6 or 7 questions by text. And then I did the test. And then late Saturday evening, I think it was, I got my results by text.
Yeah.
And it was negative. But I thought it was quite a good, seamless process.
Yeah.
It's a pretty uncomfortable test to have, but other than that, it's seamless. There was a lot of people.
And that wasn't available in that first wave.
Totally.
Yeah. So now the processes are much smoother. In terms of us, in terms of our preparation, we've got a couple of months, actually nearly 3 months now of experience behind us in terms of the protocols. And bear in mind, like our protocols we've gone back to the original phase, which we did.
Where are the protocols now? Because you asked players they couldn't go to anything other than to a doctor or a shop or to buy.
There's a number of levels. But firstly, every player every morning has to complete a phone app. There's a phone app with about 14 questions on there. They've got to complete that which is basically in getting them to indicate whether they've got a sore throat or that sort of stuff. And if there's a red flag on any of those questions, then they don't come to training.
Right.
Okay. When they get to training, there's a cordoned off area, or secure area, I should say, a clean area where the players will go into. No one else is allowed inside that bubble, other than the players that play. The to and from training, they've got to go in their own vehicle. They're not allowed to go in an Uber, taxi, public transport, any of that sort of stuff. It's basically keeping them away from risk of contamination. If they go to the shops, they've got to go direct there and back in their own transport. They're not allowed to play golf or do recreational activities. So
they're in lockdown.
They are pretty much in lockdown, yeah, and that's
and monitored.
And monitored very closely, yeah.
Yeah.
So they get temperature tested when they go to training as well. Everyone, and if their temperature's not in the range, then they're not allowed to train.
What's your biggest worry now?
The biggest worry is no doubt the community infection rate being controlled, and that's come out of Victoria originally. So I mean that's a concern. The Queensland closing the borders is not a worry for us because we had permission before, because we fly in on private charter flights and back out on the same day.
Can I ask you who pays for that?
We don't. Yeah,
NRL.
NRL pays for that.
Does that cost a lot?
We've got a huge cost for that, but it's what we have to do.
Yep.
It's what we have to do. So there's a whole lot of protocols. There's document that's about 60 pages. It's got all the protocols on it.
Because I saw something the other day, and it nearly killed me because I'm aware of that protocol. And they said, "Oh, well, we should be able to hold a rally or a protest here in Sydney or Brisbane because the NRL's allowed to play football." Well, hang on a minute. The NRL guys fly in and fly out on their own plane. They're escorted from the aeroplane in their own transport. They're not getting in taxis or Ubers and things like that, or walking there or catching a train or a bus. They go to the venue, they play the game, they get shipped back out that night. They come back here in Sydney or wherever, and then they go home and in their own cars, and then they go to training in their own cars, and then they get, as you said, they get hot spotted at the training environments, in their own environments, and they get tested, and they're filling out all sorts of forms to make sure everything's okay. So there's nothing like a protest.
Well, it's exactly right, and it's funny when we announced that we're coming back on May 28. And we were developing all these protocols. I was getting a lot of emails and social media criticism for how ridiculous, like that's irresponsible and all this sort of stuff. But they didn't even know what the protocols that we had in place. These people, so it's people are naively commenting on what we were going to do and how irresponsible it was when they weren't even aware of what we were doing.
I mean, it doesn't surprise me because, I mean, social media, I guess to some extent, is designed to drag out all the cockroaches who want to actually have a peck at you. I mean, the captain kills me. But equally so, that's why these things are important. These are opportunities actually to lay the foundations for everybody to actually have proper knowledge about what you actually did. And this is like probably 2% of all the stuff that's actually going on. It's much more complex than what you're explaining today on what is actually happening at the ARL for the players and at the club levels and at the game level, and probably even to some extent to the fan level as to who can attend a game, is much more complex. And I as a board member of a club and as a fan of footy, I actually want to say thank you to you, Wayne. I mean, and to your team. It's been brilliant. But
just on that, there's a really good point for everybody out there that I could share.
Because I was going to ask you, what would you share?
From my lessons from Project Apollo. First one is that because the world was changing and the landscape was so fluid, like in the first week that we looked at what we were going to do when we set the May 28 deadline with the experts, because the infection rate was still fairly high, we would look like we were going to have to put everybody in a bubble, and they'd stay in that bubble and couldn't leave it. So hotels, for example, out in the precinct at
I remember
Homebush
and
stuff like that. So, and the players were, that was, the players are going, we don't want to do that. We're going to leave it. But that's what it looked like, yeah. And then within 10 days, the infection rate came down a fair bit, so we were able to share a positive story. So the message to the players then, so when the players had to have the protocols they've got now, they're going, at least we don't have to go into the full-on lockdown. So, that was really interesting to share the worst-case scenario and then the positive. But the planning was much more. The process of planning was much more valuable than the plans, right? Because the plans changed, but it was the planning process of just communicating, getting everybody sharing and talking and on the same path that was the really important thing. And that's why for businesses it's really important to get your stakeholders involved in the process. Yep. The actual outcome may change in a rapidly changing world.
You're right, the assumptions always change.
Yeah, and that's where this iteration piece comes in. We've got to iterate nowadays, and that's exactly.
And what Wayne means by that is you've got an iteration being, plan number 1, plan number 2, part 2, part 3. Like you keep having iterations of the product. Or the plan, because you have to change your assumptions as the assumptions change. But what doesn't change is you still got a structure. And probably the most important thing I got out of all this, and I'm glad you actually raised it, is day one, you've got to all understand what your purpose is.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is your purpose? Because you're going to get times when you think, shit, how am I going to fix this? The how question comes up, and the only thing that carries you through the how piece is the why piece. I know why I'm doing this, so we'll work out how to do it somehow.
Because it's so important. The why is so important that I cannot not put all the effort in that I need to put in.
Yeah. Junior, what opportunities did you see come out of this crisis? I mean, opportunities always arise out of crisis. What did you see?
There's been plenty of opportunities, I think, Mark. If I was to pick one that really stood out, it's been and it doesn't involve us getting back onto the field. It's when we got back onto the field, changing the rules. We actually, and this is give credit to Peter V'landys here. He said we really need to go back to one referee because this is an opportunity now to take notice of the fans. He said the majority of fans out there don't like the two.
Here on one of them.
Yeah, don't like the two referees. So Peter gave that task to Graham Annesley to look at how we could go about that. It would also help save money, which we're looking to save money. And Graham spoke to me about it because it had to go before the commission. And I said, I really can't support a one referee model unless there's some changes around the rule.
You're talking about the play the ball?
Yeah, the play the ball. Because the second referee was there just to try and speed up the play the ball because there was this wrestle that had crept into the game. And if we took the second referee away, for me it was going to be a nightmare. Anyhow, Graham mentioned to me about there was a game back in 2012, an All-Stars game where there was a rule change where the 6 again rule had been used. And I said, can you give me some video on that? So I had a look at the videos, and it was amazing how quickly that game was compared to what it is now. And I said, well, I'll support the one referee provided the 6 again goes in. So what we did was I then held a meeting with a number of stakeholders. There were quite a few coaches there, quite a few senior current players there. Cooper Cronk came along as his next player as well. There was different stakeholders there. Most of them, and Wayne Bennett was there as well, and most of them, apart from Wayne Bennett, said that we don't want to rush it in. We've got to go through the process of testing it. And where do you test it? Like, you can't test it in the junior footy. It's not the same as the NRL. Anyhow, so came out of that meeting and I spoke to Peter and I said, I think we just got to go ahead with it. And we then put it before the commission. The commission supported it, and we've changed the rule. And it has been phenomenal how much it's sped up.
Oh, totally. Game. And it's actually changed the structure of the game, and some players have become more outstanding as a result of it. Like, I mean, it's actually created opportunities for other players.
And for the smaller people. The smaller players now come back into their own. Those that are a bit more mobile around the ruck and stuff like that. So it's out of the opportunity. And in your businesses, challenge yourselves as to, what can you do differently and how can you do things differently.
And what opportunities are rising.
Absolutely.
Well, where's the old system now being shown to be completely naked as a result of the new environment? So is there something that's in existence in relation to the way we operate that only operates in the past world?
Yep.
And was always there only because of the past world.
Yeah.
And now we've got a new world. What can we change? I'm always thinking about what sort of things I can change in my business and how can I pivot. I'm always pivoting. And that's a great example of pivoting. That's the 6 again rule plus the one referee. So you pivoted the game into a faster game.
Absolutely.
Makes it more watchable. I'm sure the broadcasters like it.
And the thing was, Mark, we wouldn't have got that in if it had been the old world where everything was used to going through a process of testing, trialling, and ultimately it probably wouldn't even get to the NRL level. So
gets sanitised so many times. It's
worthless. But now the world is and I think it's changed for the good in that way that people are a lot more adaptable and malleable because they've had to be that way.
Isn't it interesting? I want to say thank God for Peter V'landys, because if Peter V'landys wasn't there, he wouldn't have anointed you to do the project. We probably wouldn't be watching NRL as early as we got to watch NRL, if at all, and we wouldn't be watching the game as it is today. So, genius Peter V'landys has been able to run that organisation, and for you, Junior, it's a magnificent achievement. I mean, and what you and I talking about this on the way up in the lift. I guess it's, we're lucky to some extent we're in this position, but why does Wayne Pearce do these things? I mean, apart from your business, you've got enough. You could just be doing running your businesses and doing your consulting and helping build teams and helping people become great leaders within teams in your private businesses. But why does Wayne Pearce keep throwing himself into these environments?
I suppose it goes back to why I came on the commission. I've been working in my consultancy for, as I said, for 20 years. I've been on the commission now for 8 years, and when I first came on, I was actually doing media work as well as running my consultancy. And when I came onto the commission, was certainly not about money, because I took a significant drop in money because I wasn't allowed to do, and I chose not to do the media work because it was a conflict. And why I came onto the commission was because I felt that with the experience I had over the many, many years of being involved in the game, I could make a contribution that was going to be worthwhile. So for this particular project, more than anything I've been involved with, I was really super excited to get involved with it because I knew what the stakes were. The stakes were massively high for the game, and I felt that I had the skills to work with a wonderful group of people. The people that I've worked with on Project Apollo, I've got really close to those guys, and they're all fantastic in terms of what they contributed. So for me, it was just the legacy piece, I think.
And also, I guess there's an intellectual piece too. I mean, just to test yourself that you could actually do it, because Wayne Pearce as a athlete, and I know you still do it in some respects, or you were doing many years ago in terms of your training, your own training regime after post footy. We're always trying to see whether and how we can improve ourselves, how we can test ourselves, and there's an intellectual test associated with this. Can I do this?
Well, you're exactly right, Marcus. It's a real. For 20 years, I've been talking about this is how you create good teams. This is how you lead. This was an opportunity more than anything else for me to come and apply it, and not to see if it works, but to show how it works, and
to show yourself to some extent,
and prove it to myself. Exactly, absolutely, yeah. So there was very much that aspect of it as well.
Well, I'm going to give him a plug. All right, I don't give a shit whether this looks naked or not. Here's a bloke who's just pulled off what I think is one of the greatest and most important changes in rugby league history. For me, it's going to go in rugby league history. Him and his team have done something particularly special in an extraordinarily difficult time, and it's all around his very job. It's team building, it's leadership at its most acute. It was dealing with issues and problems right from the very get-go, especially the naysayers, and it was setting themselves a date which was committed to by their chairman. So if you're looking to build your business and you want to talk to this guy, where do they go to, mate? Tell us where they find you.
Just Google Wayne Pearce Advantage, and they'll take you to the website. And if you're interested in having a chat, you could feel that I might be able to assist, then
well, mate, there's plenty out there, because I can tell you now, I know small businesses, the people who listen to this show, the number of small businesses who have got projects which they have got no idea how to kick off, or they're trying to work out how to survive in the next period. But if you want the best, well, this is one of them, which is why I brought him onto this show today. Here's one of them, and if you want a proxy as to what he's done, just have a look at the game. Watch it. It was on last night, Thursday night. It'll be on tomorrow night, Friday night. It'll be on Saturday and Sunday. It's the game of the Rugby League. Here's the guy. Thanks very much, Junior. All the best to you, mate.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it.